my first video, I talked about how life is full of stories. Now, some of these stories are attached to objects that we have around our home. I guess you could call them story decor. I have lots of story decor from my own life and from other people's. They're mementos, really. Everyone has mementos. And this place, we've lived here for 25 years, so it's stuffed with them. We'll start off in the front porch. I originally used this chest as a filing cabinet for my writing. I bought it a long time ago when I was living in Canada, which is where my husband comes from. I think it originated in Maine because, as you can see, it belonged to someone called F.P. Reynolds from the US Army. And when I did a bit of digging, I discovered he was a high-ranking medical officer during World War One. And his son or grandson was also in the army. I can't remember if it was World War II or the Korean War or both. Anyway, the family seems to have ended up in Maine, so I guess it isn't surprising that his army chest ended up in Nova Scotia. And moving into the entrance hall, we have a couple of pictures by Ken Searle. I love both these paintings because they're from Sydney's inner west, where my husband and I used to live before moving to the mountains. Ken actually partnered up with my friend Nadia Wheatley, who's also a writer. They collaborated on a few books together. Nadia is probably best known for her children's books like My Place and 5 Times Dizzy. But she's written some wonderful stuff for adults as well, like this fantastic autobiographical work about her mother and father. She also wrote the definitive book on Charmian Clift, which you have to read. And here's another piece of furniture with history attached. We picked this up in Sydney and were told that it was originally at a boarding school, a girls' boarding school. After we brought it home, we pulled open one of the drawers and found all this graffiti. Ruth Dempster. Nicole Williams was here. Kim Feldmeyer. I think it's fitting that there's a doll's house on top of the chest now. And this doll inside it. This is my grandmother's doll, Bobby. She was built in the 1920s and she has a lot of history too. Apparently when my grandmother was a little girl, someone broke Bobby's head with a vacuum or carpet cleaner and she had to be sent to the Dolls Hospital to get repaired, as you can see. Next, in the living room, we have one of a pair of tables which my parents bought in Papua New Guinea back in the late 1950s, I think. My dad always said that the guy who sold them the tables came to the door and he, according to my dad, wasn't even from the right family. I think Dad was suggesting these kinds of tables were traditionally made by a certain clan and this guy wasn't from that clan. But I still think they're lovely. This is the second table, which is bigger than the first. And in the sunroom is my desk, which is another Nova Scotia find. It's the postmaster's desk from a town called Hubbard's, or so I was told when I bought it. I'm sure it has a lot of stories behind it too. It's got all these great little shelves and cupboards back here for storage. And on the desk is an angel once given to me by Judith Clark. Judith was an award-winning children's writer who used to live in a village up the road for a while. She came to a birthday party of mine once and she gave me this. Apparently she liked it because its name was Helga. Probably Judith's most highly acclaimed book was One Whole and Perfect Day. I personally always enjoyed the Al Capsella books because they were so funny. Judith had the most fantastic sense of humour. And just up from Helga is another birthday present from another local author and illustrator named Beth Norling. Beth put all these wonderful quotes on this piece of canvas for me. Not all of my story decor objects are about friends and family. I bought this lovely statue ages ago on an island called the Isola Maggiore in Italy, on Lake Trasimeno, and it was a place where St. Francis once stayed. I have such fond memories of that island, and this statue reminds me of it. And this one is Saint Fiacre, the patron saint of gardening. I bought him at the Cloisters Museum in New York, which is one of my favourite museums. I love that museum. I even actually wrote a book once that was set in there, but it never got published. Happens quite a lot. As you've probably worked out, I'm a huge fan of medieval art. I can't afford the real thing, so I get casts and copies. And since medieval art is all about saints, there are a lot of saints around here, mostly bought from church and museum gift shops. I even have a saint in the garden, a St. Francis, looking rather battered, unfortunately. Even my two big garden pots are copies of medieval fonts. Neither of them have much of a story attached. I just went out and paid money for them. But some of my garden decor objects do have more complicated histories. Like this medieval plaque, which I bought with a friend when I was visiting her in a town about 2 hours from here. And this magnolia, which used to belong to my grandmother. She was growing it in a pot, and then my mother inherited it, and eventually she gave it to me. Originally I put it somewhere it didn't like, but when I moved it to this spot it took off. Which is nice, it's like a tribute to my mum. But if you're looking for story decor, the best place to find it is somewhere like the Macarthurs Arcade in Katoomba. There are just so many stories in here, and this one seems pretty gruesome. This is some kind of receipt from 1818. And this is a ship's log from the Second World War. I'd love to know the stories behind both these documents. I'm an absolute sucker for antique shops like that one. Luckily, there are a few of them around here. I'm also a sucker for old books, especially books with history behind them. Books that have inscriptions in them. Like this one. This one was published in 1855 and it once belonged to someone called Grace Wiggins. And then after that, I think, or maybe before that, it belonged to somebody called J. Squeer. So both those people were reading this book before me. I find that very comforting. Anyway, happy reading.